Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. This episode is part of our Indies Introduced series, where we spotlight debut authors handpicked by booksellers from around the country. In each episode, a bookseller from the Indies Introduced panel will interview the author of a debut title featured in our program.
Hi, my name is Sophie Chen, and I'm a bookseller at Belmont Books in Belmont, Massachusetts, located right outside of Boston. I'm delighted today to be joined by Maggie Su, the author of Blob, which will be out on January 28th. Maggie Su is a writer and editor. She received a PhD in fiction from University of Cincinnati and an MFA from Indiana University. Her work has appeared in New England Review, Four-Way Review, Tri-Quarterly Review, Puerto del Sol, Juked, Diagram, and elsewhere. She currently lives in South Bend, Indiana with her partner, Cat, and Turtle, and Blob will be out on January 28th. Thank you so much for joining me, Maggie.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled.
Yeah, love the book. It was so much fun.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah. And for listeners that don't know about the book, this one is about this Taiwanese American girl who finds this blob behind a dumpster, takes it home with her, and starts forming it into this human person who she makes her boyfriend eventually. And so I guess my first question is, what was the inspiration for the book and how did this blob come to be?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So I started it as a short story actually in 2019 in a fiction workshop. And then over the summer, I took a playwriting workshop. So Blob turned into a 10-minute play. And then it was the spring of 2020. We were in lockdown. Started work on Blob as a novel. So Blob has transformed into different forms, but the kind of heart of the conceit of the story, which is trying to mold a blob into your perfect partner, has always kind of remained the same. I think I was really interested in giving this character who has really struggled exactly what she wants, which is something or someone to kind of control and mold into who she thinks she wants. And kind of dealing with the repercussions of giving a character like that exactly what they want.
I really related to the book. I am also like the main character. I have a Taiwanese father and a white mother. And so I found a lot of it to be very relatable and very poignant, the way that race is handled in the book. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about the way that identity plays a role in the book.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah, I also have a Taiwanese father and a white mother and grew up in central Illinois. Didn't see a lot of, representation of that specific experience. I grew up very much in like reading the white male canon. And so then when I started reading Asian American literature, I was just really excited to see what contemporary Asian American writers are doing with speculative elements. And I also felt like, there were these master narratives in Asian American literature that I, as a second generation biracial person, didn't necessarily relate to in terms of the immigration stories, the mother-daughter kind of relationship. So I wanted to write something that kind of took inspiration, was very much in the Asian American canon, but that kind of represented my own experience, which is kind of race and identity being always like on the back burner, always kind of underlying the experience, but not necessarily coming to the boil of, I don't know, I felt like I wanted the vignettes with the flashbacks from Vi's perspective to kind of be these small moments. It wasn't like one traumatic event that kind of formed her identity. It was kind of all of these small little moments of difference. And she kind of, in the book, she kind of can't tell, like, is it me? Is it just my personality? Or is this the racial otherness? And I think it's kind of both in the book.
Yeah, I found it so relatable. And I really hope that other Asian American and minority readers will also really find that relatable. I think the book it's a really funny book. But it also does, deal with some heavier themes like race and loss. So I'm curious, how did you sort of balance the two, having it be a funny book, but also dealing with heavier issues?
Yeah, I think Vi's character, kind of her voice came through, and the defense mechanism she uses a lot of the time is humor to kind of cope with a breakup, cope with kind of, her dropping out of college, her struggles to kind of feel understood by other people. So she kind of has this internal monologue that I think is often um, using humor as a way to distance herself from things she doesn't really understand. And then the Blob, I think Bob himself was kind of, I think he adds levity to the book. He kind of comes in during a low point in her life and is kind of this optimistic character who has a lot of earnestness. And I think it's something that um, it's funny to see her, I think, engage with him. So I think um, the conceit itself, I think, helped bring some levity to some of her, depression and some of her darker struggles.
Yeah. And getting into that conceit of the blob, I'm curious what draws you to speculative fiction.
Yes, I've always loved speculative fiction. I grew up reading fantasy. I'm really inspired by speculative writers like Helen Oyemi and Amy Bender, who really sweetly blurbed the book. And I just am really always interested in coming at things sideways. So I love when people use speculative elements to kind of get at the real or to kind of like think about these real issues. I've been kind of interested in horror recently and the ways in which kind of people of color are using horror genres like Jordan Peele, and to think about race, to think about kind of um, using these monstrous creatures or elements or features or speculative conceits to kind of, I don't know, think about these larger themes. So just really always loved the speculative and really excited by what opportunities it's created to kind of shift the idea of genre and literary fiction from this kind of realist mode to something that kind of has some crossover appeal for audiences.
Love that. And I'm also curious to hear, I love hearing about what different authors, what their writing process looks like. So could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, yeah. So for Blob, it was very rigid. I came up with an outline. I was very inspired by, I was teaching a screenwriting class despite having never written a script. And so I was really inspired by like the three-act structure. And so I was very rigid in thinking about the plot points for Blob, and I outlined everything out. Obviously, everything changed as I was writing it, but I had a very strict, I was going to write for 2 hours a day or 500 words, whichever came first. I very often, 2 hours came first. Um, but I used these really strict kind of thinking about cause and effect, thinking about these plot points, because I think I'm a very messy writer. So giving myself like a container like that allowed me to kind of play a little bit more. I felt safe within those containers. So each chapter I was like, it's going to be 3,000 words. I'm going to write 500 words a day, and then I'm going to break it up into 1,000 chunk. Anyway, I had all these different like goals for myself. And I think that it helped. And obviously, there's flashbacks, there's all sorts of different vignettes in the novel. So you can see it's not necessarily just like a linear story. But I tried to follow what was fun within those constraints that I gave myself. And now writing the second book, I feel like I'm being a bit looser with it. Makes me a little nervous. But I still feel like for me as a writer, everyone's so different with their process. But for me, I think, yeah, just having those constraints helps me map out where I'm going and not feel as lost when I'm confronted with the blank page, which is always terrifying.
Mhm. Yeah. And a little bit of a bonus question, but in your bio, you mentioned you have a pet turtle. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your turtle.
I was so happy that you were going to ask that. So yeah, I got my turtle Leo, named after the Mutant Ninja Turtles, Leonardo. And I actually got him when I was 14. So I'm 32 now. He's an 18-year-old turtle.
Wow.
He We got him in Chinatown in Chicago. He was like this small, only had like a 1% chance of survival. But he's still here. He's gotten much bigger, and he's a red-eared slider, and he likes to bask in his lamp, and he swims sideways a little bit. But yes, he's wonderful. But if you do get a turtle, you have to know it is a commitment.
I know 18 years, that's a long time. That's really impressive.
Yeah, he can vote, so that's
Yeah.
good.
Well, thanks so much for joining me today. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention?
No, I just wanted to thank you so much for all the kind words about Blob. I love independent bookstores. They're so vital to our community, and I'm just really thankful for everything that you guys do.
Thank you. We really appreciate that. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA website at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!